Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. My name is Mark Cook, and I'm one of 3 co-chairs with ECA's Education Committee. This is the second of our 3-part series on influencing public policy relating to climate change mitigation. Last month, we focused on local policy. Tonight, our focus is more on state policy. And next month, we will conclude this series focused on federal policy. We can all appreciate how busy this time of year can be, even in more ordinary circumstances. So ECA is incredibly grateful that tonight's panel of speakers have agreed to volunteer their time in order to share with us some of their own experiences and ideas for influencing state climate change policy. So thank you, panelists. Here's how we'll proceed. Each separate presentation will be up to 12 minutes max, so all have adequate time. And I will briefly introduce each speaker immediately beforehand. We have a total of 5 presentations, 4 by individuals and 1 by a team of 2 co-presenters. After the 5 presentations, we should have about 20 minutes remaining for Q&A, moderated by Marianne Krasny, another of our Education Committee co-chairs. Please post your questions for our panel using the Q&A button at the bottom middle of your screen rather than the chat. That way we don't commingle unlike things. After the Q&A, we'll have a quick checkout and we plan to wrap up at 8 Eastern time. So continuing on, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Columba Sains. Columba is a leader with Mom's Clean Air Force's Eco Madres collaborative program. Most of all, she is a mother to 3 young children residing in Phoenix, Arizona, where she loves educating moms and kids on issues related to the environment and health. Columba holds a degree in liberal arts and has worked for over 10 years, uniting her community by teaching faith and community advocacy with a focus on early education and youth group programs. Columba recently had the opportunity to join a global group of moms who all agreed that moms are willing to be direct and work hard to ensure that they are building a cleaner world for their kids. So Columba, please take it away. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark, Jen, and Hazel for the invitation and for being here representing not only moms across the states, but moms here in Arizona locally. So as Mark mentioned, I am Columba Sains. I am part of Moms Clean Air Force, where our mission is to protect our children from air pollution and climate change. We envision a safe and stable and equitable future where all our children breathe clean air. We are a community of more than 100 moms and dads that united against air pollution. We urge a crisis for climate change to protect our children's health. We fight for justice in every breath, recognizing the importance of equitable solutions in addressing air pollution and climate change. So what's most important for us is how we can bring people together so we can advocate for these issues. And I strongly believe that to do so, we need to tell our community, why are we fighting for this? As a mom who saw her daughter at the age of 2 years wheezing, when we moved to a community, an urban community, I was unfamiliar with environmental issues. In this area where we moved, it was highly polluted. I recognize myself, my privilege that I have to take my children to the hospital, to the emergency center, or to a clinic when they feel bad. But not all children, especially Latinos and communities of color, have this type of privilege. Some members of my community are even afraid to go to a doctor because they're going to be asking for a social security number, or the first thing they're going to be asking too is their insurance, one that sometimes we do not have. And for starters, that's when our struggle starts. In the middle of a pandemic, we sometimes we don't have our work. Most of our Latino communities work, it's outside. So this past summer, we had one of the highest, one of the most extreme heats here in Phoenix, Arizona, 117 degrees. So it's almost impossible to do those jobs being outside. It's, as a mom, it was really hard because I could not let my kids go outside because of the extreme heat, but also because of the high polluted rates that we got here in Phoenix, Arizona. The American Lung Association continues to give us an F for the quality of our air. So that's where we as moms are worried. And then now with the pandemic, all of the places for our kids to play, they're closed. We also believe that we need to leave accessible places for our community to participate. So that's why we have, sorry, my kid is asking for so just give me one second. No tengo mano. Ve para allá. So we have space for our moms. We know that we're busy. We're having to educate our kids and here at the house. We also are changing diapers, breastfeeding, and trying to save the world as well. So I was saying, we have places in our website at momscleanairforce.org where moms can go and they can just sign onto letters and advocate for children across the states so they can have clean air. We also host events. One of them, the local level, will be moms and mayors. At the state level, it will be our playing that we are doing it, that we just did it this past week, where we got our moms together and we partner with different organizations as well, such as Mi Familia Vota, Corazón Latino, who help moms that also help us to raise their voices. And especially, we did this bilingually. It doesn't matter if our community cannot prepare to do those interviews in English. I am there to support them and translate for them. De verdad es un placer hacer esto con mi comunidad y levantar sus voces, porque sé que es muy importante como Latina. And we also organize within families and friends. We truly believe in the power of cafecitos that are known with the Latino community, or house parties. That's how they're more recognized here. And we just talk about these issues. It can be after dinner, it can be right before naps, or right after our kids go to bed. We just, as moms, we get together, and I just let them know how environmental injustice is real, and that how, as moms, it is important to lift up our voices to speak out against climate change. As I mentioned, the most impacted by climate change is our community. Our jobs are outside. We live in those urban areas where we tend to be near the freeway. The space that I moved in had one of the two largest bus areas. It had the school buses and also had the city buses. And these buses are turned on from early hours on the day. Also, we have to fight against the racism that our community lives. I speak in my house, Spanish is my first language. And sometimes people will look at me differently just because speaking Spanish to my children. And I believe in the power of diversity that this country brings to us. And I think that at this point, having and seeing all the injustices and the racism, it's affected by climate change in so many ways. Our education, higher bills with electricity when we need to turn on all those ACs in an old place. Those bills can be more than $500. So it's really expensive. And I'm telling you, not because I also hear it from my community, but I live that. When I first moved in, when I first got married, my rent pay was $500, but also my electricity bill was $100. So we struggled. It was even though we took care of how many times we turn on the AC, it was something really hard. So our community is struggling right now. Sometimes because of the pandemic, we need to stay home for 2 weeks. We do not have pay leave for parents. Who's gonna take our children to school? Who's gonna teach our children from home? Who is gonna bring the food to our table? All of those issues are impacted by this pandemic, but climate change make them worse. I would like to mention a quote from Pope Francis, and it says, "If we destroy nature, nature will destroy us." So as a woman of faith, I also believe that we need to protect life in all stages, from birth to natural death. And this is really important for me because we need to take action now in order to save future generations, and they can have a stable planet where they can succeed and thrive. I have 3 children, as I mentioned before. They have 5, 3, and 1. I want to picture a place and a planet, especially if we plan to stay here in Arizona. I cannot believe how hot it will be in here. So it is really important that we start not only advocating at a local, but also at a state level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Columba. It was really nice to hear from you and to see your children. We don't get to see that very often on our Elder Climate Action presentation, so that was really neat.
Thank you so much. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna open the door because they're all at the door.
Okay, thank you. Hazel Chandler is our next speaker. Hazel is a children's champion and brings diverse groups together to find common ground and solutions. She has a BA in early childhood development, an MA in management, and is a certified public manager and presently outreach consultant for the Union of Concerned Scientists with ECA. Hazel's background spans government, nonprofit, and business, including elementary education, healthcare, social services, mental health, and environmental climate change. Hazel is also on the National Steering Committee for ECA. She serves as its National Collaborations Chair, and she is the co-founder of ECA's Arizona chapter. Please take it from here, Hazel.
It's always a hard act to follow with Columba, and I just want to tell a little story about her. And this is not necessarily statewide, but on a federal level, I had the opportunity to lobby in Washington, D.C., Jen and I both, with Columba and these children, including this one, I think was just a baby, maybe 6 months old at that time. I believe that's the one that was with us as a baby. This was one of the most amazing things that I've ever done. I've done a lot of lobbying, I've done a lot of groups, but being there with 4 little children under 5 and some teenagers, and a very diverse group, many of whom didn't speak English, was beyond powerful. It, for me, made absolutely confirmed that as we start to look at taking action at a state, federal, local level, we have to look at it from a perspective of intergenerational, multicultural, and interfaith approaches. That's where the power is. That's where we get things done. That's where people listen and remember who we are. You know, we have to realize that when we meet with our state legislature or our federal staff or their legislators, they see hundreds of people, and they see people from all different the lobbyists are lobbying for corporations. They see all kinds of people. But when they see us come together across generations, across cultures, across faiths, and be able to talk about things that are real to us, like Columba's concern about her child that can't breathe our air in Arizona, and I'm in that same category. I have trouble with with allergies and asthma because of living here for so long with the air. Then that makes a difference, and they listen. Arizona's had a chapter of ECA for about 3 years, I think now. 2017, I believe, was when we started. And we organized around collaborations. We organized and did a pre-conference for the Citizens Climate Lobby Wild West regional conference that was being held here. And throughout all of our experience here in Arizona and building our chapter, we have built around those collaborations. We both built around intergenerational, multicultural, interfaith collaborations, working, for issues that were most important for our state, and asking our leaders to take action. In September 2019, which is a little over a year ago and feels like 20 years ago, we received a grant from Environmental Defense Fund to do 5 town halls across our state called the Faces of Climate Action. And again, that was the multi-generational, interfaith, and multicultural approach. And what ended up happening, we had very short time, 2 months to pull it together. And there was no way I could do it alone. The only way I could do it was bringing groups together. And we did one in Flagstaff, 3 in Phoenix, and 1 in Tucson. And we had groups like Moms Clean Air Force. We had CHIPSA. We had the Navajo Nation was represented. We had Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance and Interfaith Power and Light, and city mayors and county elected officials and federal elected officials and state elected officials, and people from a number of different groups that participated. And what was so powerful was that we all got to know each other. We all got to hear each other. We got to hear our issues and where our issues came together. And we got to, our cities were saying, well, I didn't realize that this was going on at a federal level or this was going on at a state level. We learned a lot from each other. And I think this is the way we start to make changes in our state, our federal, and our local, and respond to the climate crisis. A lot of things have happened since then. we have a very active coalition now that's working across these areas, and we work closely on lots of projects. We have come together around impacting a major statewide policy, our Corporation Commission, which makes the decision on all of our energy and energy usage and all of those laws. Our state doesn't have the authority to set carbon emission regulations. Our Corporation Commission does. We have had a powerful group that's been working with the Corporation Commission to pass strict commitments to greenhouse gas standards. We have had about 20 groups working together, and everyone was very committed. And we had groups like Moms Clean Air Force and CHIPSA and Sierra Club and others that were testifying, doing joint letters and working with those corporation commissioners, and we got it passed. That's a huge step for Arizona. It didn't look like there was a chance, and you know what, that we would pass it, but we did. And it's right now it still has to have some comments, but it's a big step forward. You know, at a state level, it's just, and at our Corporation Commission, our state level, at all levels, building those relationships and building those relationships between local and state and federal is incredibly important as well. I just can't stress that enough, that's important. Talking and informing each other across the state level of things that are going on helps each of us to be more effective. I just cannot stress building collaborations, or if you're not in the place to start building collaborations, find a collaboration that's already existing that you can fit into. That's the way we make change. We make our voices heard when we come together, when we mobilize, where we have joint efforts, and then we have to do it across so that all voices are heard loud and clear. I believe I'm probably about out of time, so I will turn it back over to Mark.
Thanks, Hazel. Yeah, for everybody's benefit, just as a quick aside, the reason I became involved with ECA is because of one of the events that Hazel helped host down in Tucson. And after I left it, I had made a decision to get involved with Elders Climate Action, and it is her collaborations that have really helped the organization do more than what we could do alone. So thanks, Hazel. Rick Lent and Seth Evans are members of ECA's Massachusetts State Chapter, and they will be next. Rick is a member of the leadership team of Massachusetts Chapter of Elders Climate Action. He joined ECA in 2015, attracted by its mission of protecting the well-being of future generations. He retired from his consulting practice in 2017 to spend more time on local and state efforts to address climate change. He received his PhD from Syracuse University in education and organizational change. Seth retired from teaching 4th and 5th graders in Needham, Massachusetts. Prior to teaching, Seth was a business consultant in community economic development and worker ownership settings, including serving as the CEO of a worker-owned healthcare company in Boston. In addition to serving on the leadership team of Elders Climate Action Massachusetts, Seth has remained active in education-related causes, including serving on 2 committees of the Massachusetts Teachers Association and organizing teachers and parents to limit overuse of digital technology in schools. Rick and Seth, please continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. With everybody's permission, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to put up a few slides that will help guide us through our presentation.
Seth, do you want to do the poll first?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Do that real quick.
Let's do that. Yeah, sorry about that.
I'll go ahead and launch it.
Yeah, so we're asking people just to answer these very quickly. Don't worry too much about if you're not sure. We just want to get a quick impression about what people's experience is with local legislation.
We'll give that about 5 more seconds.
Thank you.
And I'll go ahead and close it.
Thanks.
And we can see the results now.
Excellent. So it's interesting. We have, I'd say about a 50-50 split here of people who have had some meetings and experience with state legislation, state legislators, and those who have not. So we'll try to pitch our talk right in the middle.
And
I will share.
I was going to say, and I think that between the last two choices on, do you understand the process of passing legislation in your state? Those last two choices, I think so or not sure, came up to about 48%. And I'd say those people all get a star because I don't think anybody understands the process of passing a bill in a state legislature. It is very murky.
All right.
That's a trick question.
So I'm actually at the end of our slide presentation here, and I need to be at the beginning. Okay. Let me see how I go back.
Can you just click back?
Yeah, I'm gonna. Right.
So, hence the title. You know, legislation is a very, very messy process. It's not pretty. We were just having a conversation this morning with one state representative who we've worked with all year very closely. She's great. And we said, you know, there's a chance for rules change to increase transparency in the legislative process at the beginning of the coming session. Will you support us in that effort? And she basically said, it won't matter. They'll just change the rules anyways. They'll do what they want. You know, work with it, work with them. That's about your only hope. But it's frustrating as an advocate. So when I joined ECA and somewhere, I think either early 2016 or I think 2015, and we were just beginning to form our chapter and we were looking around, how can we make a difference? We really needed to think about what we were doing to make that impact. And when we looked, especially later in 2016, to Washington, there wasn't really any hope. You know, things weren't going our way in Washington. Now, people from elsewhere in the country may think of Massachusetts as a very blue, liberal state, maybe very advanced on climate legislation. Well, the reality is when you get down to where the sausage is, not so much. But we knew that if you can pass an innovative bill in one state, and then a second state, and then a third state, change research says, and we've seen it in things like the Equal Marriage Amendment, in the whole country. So our focus was at the state level. And then really not any of us, including myself, had been on Beacon Hill, where our state capital is, working on getting a bill passed. We didn't know how they got developed or passed. Fortunately, we had one member who was a retired attorney from state government. And he was able to coach us. I mean, he literally, I can remember the first time I went to the State House, he took me around the State House and said, that's what this chamber is for. That's where they meet. Oh, this floor is the Senate. This floor is the House. And then we began to learn more and more. A key thing was also finding allies. So not all climate activists are going to see things the same way you do. We needed to make sure we found some allies that would work with us. Eventually, we found somewhere close to 20 to 25 organizations in the state that were willing to work on a bill that we identified as having the greatest leverage for climate change in this legislative session. Because a bill gets introduced at the beginning of a legislative session, at the end of 2 years, the legislative session ends, it's either passed or it's dead, and it goes on to the next session. And climate can't wait. We need to pass these bills now. So we wanted to do strong legislation that would make a difference in the state, that would have an environmental justice component. And as I say, eventually we had about 20 allies. In a minute, I'm going to hang it. What's the next slide, Seth? Oh yeah. So just 1 second, I'll get there. Finding your allies, and then we needed to learn more about how to make our voice heard. None of us had done this kind of lobbying before. So we did a bunch of training. And Jen's going to be sharing one of the little cheat sheets that we created for ourselves. It talked about how to make your voice heard if you're talking to a legislator. It's not just about sending out emails. It's not just about sending out a tweet. Those are helpful. But it's much more important to stand with your legislator and tell a personal story. Meet them, talk to them. Call them on the phone, show up in their office. And if you can tell a personal story as a grandparent, they pay attention. I've seen that happen over and over again. If you happen to show up with your grandchild, all the better. So it's, and you should be a constituent. You got to make sure that they know if you are their constituent. That makes all the difference. Anyway, there's some other tips in this handout that you'll get tomorrow. And, as it says here, the most effective members are personal. When we go to the State House, we all have our colors on, like Seth and I do tonight. We became known in the State House. People would say, oh, you're the green shirt people. Yeah, we're the green shirt people.
So let me just say that this green is a little different than the ECA national green. And part of it was that we really wanted to stand out, both for ourselves if we were all getting together amongst larger groups and demonstrations, but also to our state representatives and state senators. When we went to the State House, they really, they didn't forget this bright color. And so it's not trivial, really. It both created solidarity, but it also created us some name recognition. Oh, you were the guys with your green shirts, I remember you. And that was a way that we became known, the green shirt people.
And we've had legislators ask us for a copy of, could I have one of those shirts? I love that.
Now, before I get much further in talking about how we get people to the State House, I want to just say this. Massachusetts is a small state. It's different in some of you larger Western states, but anywhere in Massachusetts, you can get to Boston and the State House in 2.5 hours. And many of our ECA chapter members live within, half hour, 45 minutes of the State House. So, and there's pretty good public transportation. So asking people to come to the State House to do lobbying is an easier ask than it might be in other states. Having acknowledged that, there's a lot of work that goes into getting, well, the 40 or so. There were actually a few more of us here at the same time lobbying about the same bill. And Rick has mentioned a couple of the things, but we really trained people for a long time on what it was to pass legislation. We constantly were updating people about our legislative activities in our newsletters and our action alerts. We had our chapter meetings were devoted largely to legislation, and our priority legislation was something that we had many speakers address the group about. We had the bill's sponsor speak to our group a couple of times. So there was a lot of effort. We also developed quite professional looking materials, because most of the time you go to the State House, you're not really actually meeting with the state rep or state senator. You're meeting with an aide, or you're leaving things behind in their mailbox, and you hope to double back at some point and actually catch them, but you often don't. And so it's really important to have good looking stuff to leave behind. And it's just a sign of your professionalism. We also left behind some goodies sometimes. We had pins made. The name of a bill that we supported was the 2050 roadmap bill. So we had pins made that said to get to 2050, to get to net zero, you need a roadmap. And we knew that the legislators weren't going to wear those, but it was a good thing to joke about with the aides or whoever we met with, saying, next time we come, we want to see you wearing this pin. And little things like that make a difference. They kind of get you remembered. And so getting remembered is important, both because they remember there are a lot of people with the green shirts, but it's also important in terms of your ability to work in coalitions. People see you showing up in your colors and showing up at hearings and things like that. And they start to recognize that you're a group that can bring people together and has some power. And so your influence in the coalitions that you're working in. Also,
In the next slide, Seth shows a hearing.
Yeah, so this is an example. Oops, sorry.
Nope.
This is an example of a hearing. It's actually me testifying there because none of the heavyweights in our group were available at that time. But there was probably about 15, 20 people in green shirts. You can't see the entire hearing room. And as I started to present my testimony, we all stood up and just to acknowledge that there are a lot of us here and we care very strongly about this issue. Another way in which the colors really helped us. I would say one other thing that's really important, and then we can move on. You know, there's a couple of different kinds of people that join groups like ECA. And a lot of them are people who are really drawn to the policy issues and who are good at analyzing bills and who are really willing to jump into all the details and understand which kind of amendments we're supporting, which ones we're not. I'm not one of those people. I never was, really. I'm more of an ideas person, and I have a background as an organizer. And I found that it's really a nice balance to have both the organizing and the policy chops in a leadership group, which I think we have. We spend a lot of time getting people to meetings. We do emails, etc., but we also made phone calls to our members whose numbers we had. We got on the phone and said, this is really important. We need you to show up. And that makes a huge difference. And so just adding that kind of organizer focus and really letting people know when something important is going on, we expect you to try to get there, and it really makes a difference.
We also have Seth is the editor of our weekly action alert newsletter. It goes out one page, you know, sort of 2 or 3 things for this week that you ought to pay attention to or do.
So we don't need you to look closely at the faces here, but this is one of probably about, well, there's 20 people here. So we had about 15 of these pages filled with people who attended an action hour for our bill. When everything went remote, we decided we couldn't stop showing up. And so we really, within 1 week's time, we put together an action hour that was attended by over 300 people. There was probably another 200 or so that signed up for this at various times. where you can see some of us with our green shirts. There were quite a few state representatives that invited, quite a few that we invited to speak. Rep. Moschino was the bill's author. She gave the keynote, but there were many other of our reps that we have worked with over the years that we asked to speak. Tommy Vitola is my rep in Brookline. Tammy Gavea is Rick's rep in the western suburbs. So this was a pretty amazing event, and I think was considered a huge success. We worked closely with Mothers Out Front and with 350 on this, as well as about 10 other organizations to plan this. But it was a testament to our status within these coalitions that we were able to initiate this and get everybody's buy-on and have it be a really successful event with only about 1 week's planning. And we think that this really gave the bill the final push that it needed to get out of the House Ways and Means Committee, where it had been languishing for quite a while.
So I think that's the last slide, and we're probably almost out of time. I would explain, at this point, everybody's going, well, did you succeed? Did the bill get passed? Okay, the sausage is still getting made. Right now, we got the only climate bill passed by the House in this session. And it got passed at the 11th hour. And it got some great amendments that we wanted, which was fine. Some environmental justice and other amendments we wanted in there. And then it went to a conference committee with the Senate, which is the way it works here. And because the Senate had passed some climate legislation, we had just passed, and again, as I say, this was the only bill that the House passed. If the House hadn't passed a climate bill, there would be no conference. There would be no legislation coming out in Massachusetts. So the House bill went to the conference committee with the Senate bill, and then they extended the session due to COVID. And right now, as of this morning, the current guess is we'll hear the result on December 23rd. So we're all hoping for a Christmas present right now.
Thanks, everybody. Happy to answer questions later on.
Okay, thanks, Rick and Seth. I think we'll be all curious to hear how that pans out. Our next presenter is Wanda Ashley Williams. She's Maryland's Regional Director of Climate Exchange, which is dedicated to moving us toward a low carbon economy through market-based mechanisms and best practices. Sorry, my dog is going nuts right now. Wanda has multi-state private and public sector experiences and serves the NAACP's National Board of Directors and as a vice president and on their National Board of Environmental and Climate Justice Programs Committee. She's also on the board of directors of the Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women and the Maryland Easy Enrollment Health Insurance Program Advisory Work Group. Wanda also served on the Clean Energy Jobs Initiative Board of Directors, advocating for the passage of the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act, and has been an active member of the Maryland Healthcare for All coalitions, ensuring all Marylanders have access to quality and affordable health care and prescription drugs. Among her accomplishments, Wanda received the Courageous Leadership Award presented at the 2019 annual MLK Award ceremony, the NAACP's 2017 Dr. William Montague Cobb State Advocacy Award for Special Achievement in Social and Health Justice, and has also been honored with the New Jersey and Maryland State Conference NAACP President's Award, Johnson & Johnson Community Service Award, and as the American Heart Association Affiliate Volunteer of the Year. Congrats, Wanda. Now you're up as an ECA volunteer.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you, Francis Stewart, for inviting me to participate in this and giving me an opportunity to talk about this fantastic legislation that we're introducing here in Maryland. The Climate Crises and Education Act is the name of the legislation. The destructive impacts of climate change in Maryland's lands, history, and economy, as well as the health and traditions, now constitute an existential climate crisis. The Climate Crisis and Education Act, the CCEA, puts a price on carbon emissions and addresses these threats to Maryland with transformative market-based solutions. Senator Ben Cramer and Delegate David Fraser Diallo are the sponsors of the legislation. The CCEA incentivizes the reduction of fossil fuel CO2 emissions and gives Maryland an opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while supporting the state's economic development and lifting its residents. It will generate billions of dollars for investment in clean energy infrastructure and our children's education, all while providing protective benefits to Maryland's most vulnerable population, low and moderate income households, as well as trade exposed small businesses. So how does CCEA works? First of all, it sets new statewide greenhouse gas emission reduction goals at 60% by 2030 and achieves net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. It creates a climate crises council made up of legislators and experts of all aspects of climate change. It establishes two types of fossil fuel fee charged at point of entry into the Maryland state. That includes a polluter pays, no pass-through provision. One of the fees is the non-transportation fuel fee that starts at $15 per ton of CO2. It increases $5 a ton per year and is capped at $60 per ton. The other is a transportation fuel fee that starts at $10 a ton CO2 per year, increases $3 a ton per year, and is capped at $37. It also establishes 3 separate funds for green infrastructure, household and employer benefits, and education. The first and most important fund is the Household and Education Benefits Fund. That will direct half of the revenue generated from the CCEA to protect low-income households and energy-intensive businesses from financial harm, as well as help fossil fuel dependent workers and communities make a transition to a clean energy economy. The Climate Crisis Infrastructure Fund will generate hundreds of millions of dollars each year to achieve additional fossil fuel emissions mitigation, build resilient infrastructure, and provide a just transition to Maryland's new clean energy economy. And last, we have the Current Education Fund that will direct hundreds of millions of dollars each year to help fund the current education recommendation for our schools in Maryland. I don't know if you guys know, but in Maryland, we have only a 90-day session. I hear you guys talk about your 2-year session, and Climate Exchange, the organization I work for, is headquartered in Massachusetts, and they talk about their 2-year session. Well, we have to really kick these bills out in 90 days. And so it is very difficult. Last year, of course, the session was cut maybe 17 days short. So a lot of bills stayed on the table, died on the table. And we are resubmitting those bills this year. The session starts on January 13th, and it will end May 12th, provided we have a complete session. The CCA was pre-filed this year. which gives us a stronger possibility of having an early hearing, which is very important. So we can make sure that we get the bill heard this year, since we just don't know where we're going next year after experiencing 2020. The session and the hearing, we will determine our hearing dates the first week of January. So the first day of January hearings, they actually start the second day of January, but we'll know exactly what dates our hearing will be for the Senate as well as the House. I want to talk a little bit about our coalition, because to get any legislation passed, you really need a strong coalition. And as we figure out how to rebuild Maryland after experiencing the worst public health and economic crises in history, the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, we have an opportunity to design and enact state policy that will address this devastating crisis. Maryland can rebuild in a way that addresses the systemic challenges that have for too long impacted some of the most vulnerable communities in the state. We must embrace a green recovery that prioritizes justice, meaningful job creation, and a low carbon economic future. We accept that climate justice, racial justice, and environmental justice are intertwined and provide a foundation for a policy designed to rebuild Maryland's economy. The Neymar Coalition is Rebuild Maryland Coalition. The coalition partners consist of a wide range of organizations and groups throughout the state. We believe that we need to be conclusive of the entire state, not just our climate and environmental partners. So we do have climate and environmental organizations at the table, but we also have educational associations and groups, civil rights organizations, faith-based organizations, student youth groups, labor organizations, as well as businesses, among others. The coalition partners met over the summer and designed a principle document that was based on our shared values that is intended to serve as a framework for which to design policy that will help meet Maryland's greenhouse gas reduction goals. The top priority was clear for all of us. People must be first. We must put people first. Progressive use of revenues for people and communities. I do have a full list of those priorities. I won't go through all of them, but if anyone wants a copy, just let me know. I'll definitely forward it to you. Finally, let me say that Rebuild Maryland Coalition meets every Monday at 2:00, and we will be meeting until session ends or until our bill is passed. We created a resolution that organizations and businesses can sign on to. And if you like, I can download or include the link in the chat. But we also have an individual petition through the Action Network. We have many people, individuals who support this bill, and they want to work to get the bill passed. So we've created a petition on the Action Network that I have a link to as well. I want to end with just this. You know, listening to the presenters and listening to the mom talk and looking at the children, this is what we do, why we do what we do, right? We have to think about future generations and what we are leaving for them. What type of world are we leaving? I have thought civil rights, workers' rights, racial justices, gender, age, but we all have to breathe air. I mean, there's no question about it. There is discrimination when it comes to that. Certain communities suffer worse than other communities, but the bottom line is we have to come together to fight this crises that we find ourselves involved in. And this is an aggressive legislation, one that we have seriously taken into consideration the needs of the community and the billions of dollars that will be generated from this fee will definitely go back into the community. And so with that, I am going to step back and I will be available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Wanda. We do actually have one more final speaker before the panel as a whole speaks, and that is Bill Murphy, who is team leader of ECA Southern Cal and Northern Cal Joint Policy and Legislative Team, and a member of the Climate Reality Santa Clara County Chapter Policy and Legislation Team. Bill is a retired lean manufacturing expert and cost accounting manager with 34 years experience in Silicon Valley, who recently also received a degree in journalism from San Francisco State University, and has also recently completed coursework at Stanford on how to exploit social media and Google search as a free publishing and advertising platform. You're up, Bill. Thank you.
Let me just unmute myself for a second. Yeah, so my story is that in 2019, I inadvertently blundered into a meeting of 350 Silicon Valley, which was forming a brand new policy and legislation team. And my Northern California ECA chapter didn't have one. So I was the junior person and I was just along for the ride for 350 Silicon Valley. And I noticed that they had everything was centered around a priority bills list, and they had about 20 or so bills on the priority bills list in the legislature in Sacramento. And so as 2020 started, I realized we were starting the season again, and I suddenly found myself at the center of their team, which sometimes happens when you start as a junior person, then you just graduate somehow. And I wound up being on their team that creates the priority bills list. And so I read probably 114 bills last year. We got the list down to 40 or so that were actually good enough to pursue. And then we got that list down to 18 or so that were larger rather than smaller. For example, if you could do measure greenhouse gases in the aviation industry, and they postulated that, but we didn't think it was as big as some of the other things. So the point of this is that I turned around and took that list of 18 and used it as the center for a brand new policy and legislation team for ECA NorCal. So the purpose of my talk and the way it's framed is, if you were going to spool up a policy and legislation team in any other chapter that doesn't have one yet, how would you do it? So this is kind of a recipe that we essentially followed for how we would organize ourselves. So let me first say, you got to know what you're asking. And this is really brief, but if you go to the ECA NorCal Facebook page, the banner photo at the top says, these are our policy asks. Now, I don't want to go into this in any great detail, but it's essentially lifted from Hal Harvey's team member, Chris Bush, who did a deep dive into the gap between California's greenhouse gas emissions reductions plans and where we needed to be by SB 32, which said we would be at 60% of the 1990 levels by 2030. 2035. So we all tattoo this on our arms. This is not necessarily a particular bill, but it's an overarching set of principles that we know we need to have. I don't want to linger on this, but if you want to go refer to it, just go look at the banner photo for the ECA NorCal page. Then let me go into my slideshow. So recipe, how would we do this? Great, all right. So basically, one of the things that I noticed is that there's a bafflingly large number of environmental organizations in California. It's crazy, it's nonsensical almost. But what I observed and what I copied last year that I described for you was, I noticed a couple of other people in my climate reality chapter, they'd get a call to action, and then they'd turn around and they'd light up their own network. So everybody's in 3 teams. Like she happened to be in one in Palo Alto called Actera. She was in Climate Reality, and she was also in 350 Silicon Valley. So whenever Debbie Mitells, she would hear something, she'd turn around and just light up her network. And I realized that's what you do when you're partnering in that kind of chaotic environment. And so essentially what I realized was I should just go be Johnny Appleseed spooling up policy and legislation teams. So at the same time we did one last year for ECA NorCal, we did one for Santa Clara County chapter of Climate Reality. So one of the things we realized, we're very small in our chapter in ECA NorCal. But the first thing we realized is that you can get away with that if you have a tiny core team of people who are really, really well briefed and follow the legislature in all of its details as if you were beat reporters. And so really there's just 2 of us doing that right now. Sandy Maliga is doing the regulatory agencies, and I'm the bill tracker. And I know all the query tools, and I know who to call and stuff like that in the Capitol. Then the third thing, I'm going to skip the second thing. The third thing is your broad chapter membership, which is Jen Chandler's email list. She knows who all the members are, and we are going to communicate to them, you'll see on the next slide, through several different channels. But inadvertently, we realized last year that people come to our meetings sometimes and then they split, and maybe we see them again, maybe we don't. So we had 8 people came to our first meeting of the new year last Monday. Turn them into a cadre who promise, no matter what, to be a reliable responder to your calls to action. So now you kind of got really 3 concentric circles. You see this in ECA Nationals, the way they've structured their policy and legislation team. Right now, they are the first category. And Jen's got the 3rd category. So there's this communication thing. So what you got to have is the secret sauce is you got to have for your chapters, you got to have a chapter newsletter. And I'm the social media mentor for Elders Climate Action. I help people spool up their social media pages. I strongly say that you always do a newsletter first. Members who filled out our membership form for whom we have contact information and receive our newsletter, or in the second category, our single topic calls to action, I think that's a much more substantive thing. Social media kind of tends to be a lightweight thing, but you're going to have communication in place to be a successful ledge team locally. It's real different in Massachusetts, for example, than in California. We're a virtual chapter. We never can meet face to face because everybody's like one person in each different city. So it's kind of, this is how you bridge that. Consider, for example, in your state, setting up your own state level webinars. I can see a path to us doing that in our state. Now, I talked about how we structured the core team. The bare minimum is to have a skilled bill tracker, and what we hope to do as we scale this year, because that's really what we did, was beta tested, now we're scaling, is get a couple, 3 people to work on the regulatory agencies, because there's a tremendous amount of stuff that's going on in our state in regulatory agencies. That's a couple, 3 people. Right now, Sandy's doing it for the Air Resources Board, which is one of the most powerful climate change advocates anywhere in the country. They're ruthless. And they just did a rulemaking that requires all new truck sales after 2030 to be 100% electric. That's intercity long haul trucking, intra-city FedEx trucks, that sort of thing. So they got a lot of power, but you need to have somebody on your team who's able to stay on top of them as a beat reporter. There's some other nice to have sort of down at the bottom. Our team rhythm is during the legislative calendar, which for us is basically January through August. We have to meet weekly because there's tons of nits on that list. Let's say this year we come back to an 18 bill list. You got to basically know what the news is on every one of them and turn around and know the next action item if you have to turn it into some sort of call to action. In the off season, which is right now, we can meet monthly, but what we're really doing is making sure that folks organize to go to town hall meetings, say I'm a constituent, be a presence. It'll be virtual now, but you can even hand them something like, for example, we hand them Hal Harvey's book, Designing Climate Solutions. We give it to the assistant or the staffer who's the one that does environmental issues for our 2 reps, the state senator and the state assemblyman. And then we're right now beginning the process of planning for whatever meetings we can do with as many people as we can, especially asking them to take the many pieces of legislation that were written last year that were just beautiful, but they pulled because the COVID epidemic blew a crater in the budget. We dedicate the first half of our meetings to a run through of our priority bills list. And then as we scale, we hope that will also include hot regulatory hearings. The goal is you always want to know the next step and assign that. The second half is always about learning because we've got people in ECA at every different level of sophistication. It took me 4 or 5 years being on to climate change before I was able to even wrap my mind around the idea that there is legislation, there is power. There's the business community, there's power. These are the two great centers of power in our civilization. So go beat on one or the other, right? So that of course also includes like the executive aid orders, cabinets, regulatory agencies and stuff. So what we do is we try to teach ourselves how this whole game works, because the best thing is we found with kids when we were teaching them soccer or teaching them softball or something like that, is the game is the teacher. It's not really good if the coach is the teacher. Get them in the game. And so hanging out with this for about 1 year, one full legislative cycle, you'll probably know most of these things. So, but we will do is we'll teach our people during a team meeting the online query tools, the online letter upload tools. What do you do how do you find a legislature to carry a bill idea? An important one is how strong are the blockers? Because in our state, we have a big oil industry and the blockers are very, very sophisticated. The Western States Petroleum Association. Even something as fundamental as how does the legislative calendar work? So eventually, we should all probably tattoo this on our arm. This is courtesy of 350 Bay Area Action, which is the sister group to my group, 350 Silicon Valley. Somebody came along and wrote up all the stuff that you'll soak up in your first 1, 2, or 3 years of advocacy, but you're going to be good at every single thing on here. Maybe we can pass these slides out at the end so that this is a document that people can have available to them. But it was written by Kathy Durbin of 350 Bay Area Action. This is what you do. Then there's a couple of little pieces of secret sauce that I would try to pass along. I'll try to keep this short. Second one is figure out who in your state is absolutely the best in class and just get in close with them. And by accident, I happened to join them. I didn't mean to do it. It just kind of happened because of some friends of friends and stuff. But take what you learn from them and turn around and use that to light up your team. Share that insight and that experience. Yeah, okay, it's a little bit secondhand, but it's not hearsay, gossip, and rumor. It's just you repeating what you heard from the masters. Don't be afraid to sit humbly at the feet of some really, really powerful people, because every state has got somebody who's been in this game for a while. After a very short time, you're going to find out you're the leader, for at least maybe 2022. Next secret sauce. In the journalism community, there are always a couple of people who are really good at covering the state capitol and really good at covering the environmental beat. We don't have to feast on stories about Donald Trump every morning anymore. Do this instead for a while. Change your habits for your news grazing. Then this one's a little bit different. I was a Six Sigma black belt and a lean manufacturing expert. And so I was trained to use analytical stuff to cipher out all the things you could do. But this is very difficult because we have to make ourselves have the discipline to work on the smallest number of things that will have the biggest impact. So for example, ECA National has recently determined correctly that transportation is a very big knob to turn. The next one that they're going to trot down the pipeline is going to be power sector. These are major themes along with environmental justice for ECA. This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. It requires courage because really Americans are kind of trained for learned helplessness. So just take a deep breath and have courage. So here's a good example. This came from the California Air Resources Board. This is California's greenhouse gas inventory. It's about 490 gigatons per year of carbon dioxide equivalents. So if you were looking at this and you have a small team and you don't have enough resources, and you're trying to ask yourself, what am I supposed to work on? What would you work on? Inevitably, and I was an accountant for a while before I was these other job titles, the people look at the smallest number on the page. And I don't know what's going on with human nature that way, but they do it over and over and over again. So people are going to go, yeah, we're going to work on waste management, or we're going to work on community gardens. No, you have to fix transportation in California. It's 40%. Plus, if you look over here, refineries and oil and gas on the left side, it's 51%. So our power sector is smaller than most of the states back east because we're partly down the path of doing clean energy. So in many of the other states, you're going to find that that orange thing at the top is going to be a big one. Before I close, I just want to a shout out that this really is a rough and tumble. And there's going to be times when, either climate change itself beats you down. And so both Amory Lovins with Applied Hope and Joanna Macy with her book, Active Hope, they're basically saying, if you just get busy on a substantive plan, it helps you get over that emotional content that can beat you down. But also in the state capitals, like they say in the military, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, and the enemy gets a vote. Sometimes you just have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and start all over again. What we found in California was of those 18 bills, only 4 of them got through. And one of those was a vote by mail bill. So it was sometimes right now we've got an incredible crater in the middle of the budget. And so it's just a thing. You have to somehow get tough enough to where you lift yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. I really believe that the more policy and legislation teams we can spool up around elders' climate action, the more people, I think they're just going to look at this and go, yeah, okay, I can do this. This is going to make a difference, and I can see how. We have a tremendous number of people who have done different kinds of advocacy, even if it's at the city council level throughout their lives. And now they're at this point, maybe they're looking for something good that way. It's important to keep in mind that really, as frustrating and as messy as this can all be in the sausage factory, really what we're doing is a vision like a shining city on a hill. We're inventing the safe, clean, and prosperous civilization of the future. And so all of these policies line up to create that. And that gets back to that first thing that I showed you, that with the blue ocean in the background. This is a little off the wall, but if you don't have an ECA chapter yet in your state, what would happen if you just started a policy and legislation team anyway? And then in the ensuing years, you build the chapter around that. Wouldn't that be kind of a substantive thing to do? Just try it out and see what happens. I make myself available. I have a particular point of view. I'm very analytical. Obviously, I read bills. I like math, and I communicate about those things, which is an odd combination of skills. Usually you don't find those in one person, but I want to mentor any of you. I'll put this in the comments, but call me rather than trying to email me, because my email is an absolute nightmare and disaster area. So if you want to give me 2 more minutes, I'll brief you on Sacramento and what kind of a weird year we're about to have, or else we could just turn it over to the Q&A.
Mark, you want to wrap us up, or you want me to just start the Q&A?
Yeah, I think we probably better go ahead and just jump into that, Bill. Sorry, maybe there's another way we could share that information at another time. The other thing I wanted to say really quick before we jump into the Q&A is, unfortunately, Columba had to drop off. Her kids were a more pressing need for her at a time. So we did lose her to the panel. So I just want to make everyone aware of that. But yeah, I think if you'd like, we could go ahead and jump into the panel. But thanks again, Bill. That was a lot of really great content. We sure appreciate it.
Okay, so apologies about my my video here. I think I'm just going to turn it off because obviously my camera's not working very well, but I just wanted to say hi to everybody. So there were a lot of questions, and I appreciate people asking them answering them already on the Q&A, but I think there's 2 questions that several panel members could address. And that has to do questions around forming coalitions, particularly diverse coalitions. So I think all the panel speakers spoke about coalitions, but Arizona and Wanda and Maryland, they're coalitions that seem to be bridging climate and issues of social justice and diversity. So I think those are the ones that people were particularly interested in, although maybe some of the other states are doing that also. So yeah, I think Hazel and Wanda might have something to say about, what is your experience forming coalitions to influence your state policies? And how do you go about doing that across different sectors, basically, like social justice and climate?
I think that one of the things that in Arizona we have experienced is there's a lot of coalitions that are doing a lot of different things. I think the key is how do we start to bring those people to the same table so that we can work together. And we may not need to have them all at the table at the same time. There may be groups that are working together, but there needs to be that linkages to bringing them together. The first thing that I can say about building coalitions is start to ask people, start reaching out, get to know people, make a list of people that you would like to connect with. You know, we've been trying really hard trying to get together with NAACP here in Arizona, and I've been working on it for 3 years, and I did not make any progress, and I just kept going, and now we've had some amazing conversations just the last 2 or 3 weeks. So sometimes it takes a long time with a lot of reach out before people will want to sit at the table and work together. But there's a look at what's already going on, try to see if there's ways that you can become part of those groups, and also really consider overlapping coalition work, because some may be focused on climate change, but then they do need to reach out across the other issues as well.
No, I agree with Hazel. First, you do have to ask. But in addition to that, you have to be sincere. I work with NAACP and other organizations as well, and they have a lot on their plate. And a lot of them don't really see the climate crisis as a civil rights issue. However, it is. I mean, the NAACP has definitely designated it as a civil rights issue, and they have a large department that's working around it. But reality is, if you just look at what's happening in our country and where it's happening, we know it's a civil rights issue. But I'll tell you this is the time to do it. Now is the time to reach out. Unfortunately, a person had to die. Many people had to die. And attention was brought. We had 2 crises during this year, not just the pandemic, but the racial unrest. And that brought a lot of attention to what's happening in our communities, okay? I like to say the hoods were taken off in many respects. And so people are listening now. People are listening, and people are talking now. And so not just invite them to a meeting, but make sure that they have a voice when they come to your table. Make sure that people, if it's we bring education in because we're giving money to education with this bill, but we want to hear from the educators. We want to hear their concerns, how we can work with them. And we all find out we have a lot in common. We have a lot in common. Same thing with labor union. The businesses, you would think some businesses would be against, but there are a lot that are definitely supportive of this. And so I just say, reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out, but be sincere when you do reach out.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much, Wanda. Did any other people wanted to contribute to that question? Or Hazel, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say to Wanda, that is so important. Bringing the voices to the table and making sure that they're heard, and then making sure as you start to develop actions and policies and things that you're going to move forward with, you keep those voices center in the work that's being done. You need to, I just can't support that. I mean, I can't stress that enough, how important that piece is.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so we had a question way at the beginning from Michael Allen from Florence, Oregon. And I think the question has to do with, any of you familiar with states mandating cities form ad hoc committees that are made of community members and are charged to develop comprehensive climate plans for adoption by their city? I know New York has some incentives for doing this, but I haven't heard of anybody mandating it, or maybe just anybody who has experience with this kind of states working with cities to at least encourage them to do some climate planning. Anybody have any experience with this?
Say that would be incredible in Arizona. We have the opposite problem. We have a lot of cities that are doing a great job of working on climate issues and climate action plans, and then our state passes a rule that they can't implement it. For instance, City of Phoenix passed a rule that they wanted to be 100% clean energy by 2050, and the state passed a rule that said they couldn't be. So it goes both ways. It would be great. It is the key to this is we've got to start to connect those local planning, the county planning, and the state planning, and even our federal action.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
There is a law in Massachusetts that gives resources and requires cities and towns to have climate resiliency plans, but it's not really mitigation plans, it's more resiliency.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this last question here might be for Jen. I'm not sure if it's exactly the last question. You're certainly, we might be able to get a few more of the specific ones, or maybe some of the panelists can look at those specific questions and see if they just want to answer them. Oh, it looks like, sorry, let me ask this one question about the updates, and then it looks like Wanda has a question she'd like to answer live. So can people sign up with you to receive updates? I'm not sure who StarBiz means by you, or Sherry Stark, I should say. Are you talking about ECA? Maybe you can retype your question, Sherry, if you're talking about ECA or one of the speakers. And if it's ECA, I think Jen can answer the question, or the speakers can keep an eye for that.
I can probably answer both. So obviously for ECA, if you sign up through our website, and I'll drop that link in the chat box in just a minute, that you'll get into our national database, and that way you'll receive our emails. And then for chapters, we have join forms for each of the chapters, and I'll post the chapter directory link in the chat box in just a minute as well. And so you can go to our website and you can look for the specific chapter and join that chapter through their join form. And that way you'll be part of the chapter's email list also, so that you'll get more sort of regionally specific local directive actions. So that's the best way to contact ECA. And then tomorrow when I send out the call recording, I'll make sure that I include any links to important things. I know Massachusetts has a couple of documents to share, and I'll share a PDF version of Bill Murphy's slides from NorCal. And then any of the contact information for any of our panelists, I'll make sure that gets included, so that you have the ability to access our panelists. So watch for that bulletin that goes out tomorrow.
Thanks, Jen. And thanks, Jen, for doing an amazing job supporting these workshops and getting them on air. So Wanda, did you want to talk a little bit just before we close in about 4 minutes about how we find a copy of the Maryland Climate Crisis and Education Act?
Yes, we did pre-file. Most bills are not filed until the beginning of the session, which is next year, well, in January. However, because of the unusual session we're going to have, it's going to be a hybrid session, needless to say. Most of it will be virtual. The House has really urged the legislators to pre-file their bills, which meant they had to be filed by the end of sometime in November. I don't remember the exact date. So we have not gotten the final bill from Legislative Services. That is due, they said, mid-month December, which is today. So I checked the site, it's not there, but it should be there. The bill should be there by the end of the week. And I did put the link, the web address for the Maryland General Assembly, or you can just Google Maryland General Assembly, and you should be able to get a copy of the bill at that point. I don't even have a bill number yet, but we should have it by the end of the week.
Thank you, Wanda. Thank you.
And may I say one other thing? Someone asked a question or made a statement about having some of the revenue go back to the community. That is the purpose of the benefits fund. It is really a rebate, and that money goes back to households, low and moderate income households, billions of dollars. This bill should generate $1 billion the first year and increase after that. So half of that money will go back to low and moderate income families directly as a check.
May I add something to that too, please?
Sure.
We got
In Cal-
1 minute, Bill. So yeah, 1 minute.
1 minute. In California, we have implemented a carbon tax called cap and trade, which is a market-based one because we had a Republican governor at the time, but we were still able to get about $17 a ton from polluters, which is only about 1/8 of the social cost of carbon. But in 2020, we expect to get $2.4 billion. Last year it was $3.4 billion before the recession. And about 40 to 50% of that winds up going into different kinds of environmental justice things. It goes into poor communities. We have a vast number of communities that don't even have shade trees, let alone clean water. And working outdoors in the heat, I mean, it's just an endless thing. So it's often adaptation as opposed to mitigation stuff, but cap and trade and get a big pot of cash. You're going to need it to both do the mitigation and the car chargers, but you got to do something for the people that are on the fence line.
Thanks, Bill. All right. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. We've gotten a lot of great comments and thank yous in the chat. People really appreciate the diversity of perspectives and all the information. And Mark, did you want to make a few closing remarks and announce our January federal workshop before we end?
Yeah. Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, so to our listeners, again, we just want to say thanks for listening and asking questions, and to our panelists, thanks so very much for sharing and helping to make this event successful. A quick reminder that the third and final of this series will occur on Tuesday, January 19th at 6:30 Eastern Time. A reminder will be emailed to all of you who participated tonight. And on behalf of ECA, please have a happy and healthy holidays with renewed hope for 2021. Thanks and good night.